In this video, I'm going to talk about walls, windows, and doors, really just giving a brief overview because these are the items that really start defining our space. So we'll start with the discussion of walls, their structure, get into the types of windows and doors that are most common in residential spaces. So when we think about walls, we really want to think about how the wall is built. So in our course, we're really starting out with residential interiors. And with residential interiors, the most common type of wall is a framed wall, consisting of either wood or metal studs. So when we look at a framed wall, there's some important components to that you want to know and understand. So first, if we really look at the bottom of this image, we're really thinking about the floor, then the base of the wall, and moving up. So at the base of really where the floor is held up by joists. On top of those joists, we have the subfloor. And then on top of that, we are then able to put, of course, a finished floor, and then our walls that make up our interior and exterior walls. So across the bottom, there is an individual stud running across here, and that's called the floor plate. On top of that, we can put our vertical studs that are spaced 16 inches on center in standard new construction. Older buildings, when you get into renovating older structures, you will find that there's a lot of inconsistencies, but newer buildings should be 16 inches on center from stud to stud. If we have openings, doors or windows, we have to have some, extra structure going around those. So with a door, for example, first note that the floor plate does not go through the door. If it did, you would have this 2x4 barrier that you would trip on all the time. Okay, so the door opening goes all the way down. And then inside of each vertical stud, on either side really, of the door opening, you'll see that there's an additional stud called a jack stud. And then within that, the door is mounted. On the top, we have a header that goes across above the door. And then shorter studs, often called cripple studs, are above, finishing up the space from the header to the very top. And notice at the top, before we meet the ceiling, we have two additional 2x4s running across here. It's a double top plate. So at the ground level, we have a single stud running across the floor. And then up at the top, we have a double top plate. If we look at the window, it's very similar to a door, but of course, in this case, most of the time windows don't go all the way to the floor or ceiling, but they can, of course. But a standard window opening will be somewhere centered in the middle of the wall. And at the bottom of the window, we will have a sill, and that will be two 2x4s stacked on top of each other. And then we'll have a header up at the top. And then, of course, above and below, if it's needed to fill the space, you'll have the cripple studs, again, those shorter studs in between to make up that space. Okay, so this is how a really standard residential and even commercial wall will be built. So here's a photograph of a residence that's under construction. So we can see the raw subfloor here. So that's just plywood, 4x8 sheets of plywood. And then you can see, for example, everything that we just saw in that picture. So we have that single stud, that floor plate running across, the 2x4 studs running vertical. We have the double top plate up here. And you'll also notice in here, these wires that are running through, that's the electricity that's being run through the studs at this point. This image is the same basic construction technique, but instead of using wood studs, which are very common in residential applications, these are metal studs. Metal studs are occasionally used in residential construction. It's certainly doable, but primarily used in commercial applications, really relating to cost, they're lightweight, and they don't combust like wood beams do, of course. But you'll still see the same types of ideas with the floor plate, the vertical studs, 16 on center, so on and so forth, but out of metal instead of wood. So once you have all of the framing, whether it's wood or metal, you need to finish the wall, right? So with framed walls, the most common way of finishing that wall is going to be drywall. Drywall is also referred to as gypsum, gyp, or GWB. You'll also hear it referred to as sheetrock. Okay. On top of this, then we typically finish with paint or plaster, wall covering, something like that. But this should look pretty familiar to you in terms of a finish that's on the inside of a residential building. We can, of course, have other types of walls. And in terms of structural walls, if they're not built from studs and then covered in drywall, it could be things like cement. We could have glass, block, brick, stone. A whole variety of structural materials could be used for both interior and exterior walls. The materials then can be left natural, or a surface material could, of course, be applied. So, here we have pour-in-place concrete making up all of the walls of this either apartment or condo unit. When we consider walls, we also have to consider wall openings, because if we don't have openings, we can't get in and out. So this is really where we're getting into thinking about windows and doors. So this example here is from a company called NanoWall. So it really just kind of gets you to think about wall openings sort of dramatically. So there's sort of both walls, windows, and doors in a sense. So these big structures of glass that can then be pushed and folded back and open up the entire space. So that's a pretty dramatic wall opening, no doubt. But then we're just going to kind of focus back into windows. Okay, so just thinking, standard windows. So with windows, there are, many different kinds. The most common being casement, sliding, fixed, awning, and double hung. Casement windows are very, very common in residential situations. And really what we think about with a casement window is that there are pivot points on the window and they swing out. They can have many different looks, but they actually swing to the exterior of the building. Generally, this is done with a crank that you can see at the bottom of the window. And when you spin that crank, the window opens and closes. These can have a really great look. They can be traditional, they can be contemporary. They're very flexible. They're really nice because they're really easy to open and close, especially if you have some mobility issues. They can be really easy for people. However, they do have some, design issues you need to think about. The main one being, if you don't have an overhang, if it rains or snows or anything, it's very possible that your windows, inside and out, are getting, rained on, for example. So you really need to think about the relationship between the interior and the exterior, and if those windows are protected at all. Also, since they open out like that, if there's a strong wind or something, it can damage those windows too. We also have sliding windows. Sliding windows are just that. They slide past each other horizontally. Okay, so slide back and forth horizontally. So we generally have that seam down the center. And these are, very nice. They can range in size pretty dramatically and be really cost effective and easy to use for people. We can also have fixed windows. Fixed windows don't open. They can have many different appearances, just like all of these window types. The style can vary between being very simple and rectilinear to, arched with mullions and all that. But the key thing here is that fixed windows are fixed in place. They do not open. We also have awning windows that are usually in combination with fixed windows. So that combination of awning and fixed. So the fixed part is above in this example, and that's pretty common, and that, of course, does not open. Then underneath we have the awning that pivots out sort of like a casement window does, but instead of swinging out kind of like a door, the pivot point is at the top, and they swing out so that, if there were to be rain or anything like that, it would run down the window and not sort of across the interior glass. So they just pivot at a different point. And they're called awning windows because they mimic the behavior of, an awning. Double hung windows are some of the most common, especially for residential windows. So I would imagine most of you have these in your houses or apartments. And they're that standard two-part window that you slide up and down. Some will allow you to slide both the top portion and the bottom portion. Some only one or the other. That's a double hung window, and that's typically when they both slide up and down, so they're double hung. Then we're going to look at doors. So doors, there are even more options that we're going to go through and just show some examples. Hinged, sliding, barn doors. There are many, many styles, and as you can see, they have a really huge impact on the appearance of a building and your experience going through them. Hinged doors are probably the most common type of door, kind of like double hung windows in a residence where the two panels are sliding back and forth, are the most common in a residential interior. So are hinged doors. And I think if we take a look at those, you think, yep, that's the kind of door I have in most of the rooms in my house, for example. They can range in appearance, but it's really where the fixed point of the door is hinged inside that door frame, and the door either swings in or out. You can actually see here, there's someone in the image on the lower left, I think I would say mimicking installing a door, because you can actually buy doors pre-hung inside of that door frame. And so when you go to install it, the frame is already built and the door is already hung on its hinges, and then you can screw or nail that into the raw opening in the wall. She's making it look pretty easy. We can also have sliding doors. Sliding doors are very much like sliding windows. So they slide horizontally back and forth. And, they're really space saving both on the interior and exterior because you don't have to have space where they swing in or out of the room, but they run parallel to each other in a track. They're very common on patios, decks, balconies, areas like that, and they're very commonly all glass or mostly glass. Especially in that application, I should say. Sometimes we have sliding doors on like closets and things like that, and then those are usually solid. With barn doors, we have a horizontal sliding behavior as well. But this time, the sliding is on a wall-mounted bracket, and it slides across the surface. So if that door were closed, it would cover the opening, but we would see the wall behind. So it's right on the surface and slides back and forth. These are very popular. People really like them a lot. But we have to be careful about what the application is that we're using it for. They're generally more difficult to lock, and they also offer a little less in terms of privacy and things like that because there's usually a bit of a gap around them, and they don't often seal tight. Pocket doors do the sliding behavior, horizontal as well, but this time instead of sliding back and forth in front of each other or on the exterior of a wall, they slide into the wall. So pocket doors actually have mechanisms and space inside the wall as it's built to slide and sort of disappear while they're open. So a lot of planning needs to happen if you're going to install these in a new build or, new construction. And if you're going to renovate, you need to tear the whole wall open and usually widen it and make room for this door to slide inside. But they can be really wonderful because you can close off spaces, create privacy, but then when you open them, you get a really wide open view without the obstruction of the doors being in the way. We can also have folding doors. And with folding doors, like this example here, are very commonly found on closets. So they tend not to feel quite as sturdy, and they have that folding point in the center, so it's like they almost kind of accordion and kind of push back. Again, very commonly found on, not doors that people are passing through, opening and closing a lot, but things like closets and spaces like that. We just have the general concept of a double door, okay? And double doors can happen in many configurations. As we saw, pocket doors can be single or double. Barn doors can be single or double. Hinged doors can be single or double. So double door just means two, and that we're getting a double wide opening. And then we have pivot doors. So pivot doors, in a way, will kind of remind you of a hinge door, in that kind of swinging open motion. But they're different because, as you can see in these examples, the pivot point can be really anywhere along the door. And then when you swing it open, you don't have an edge or a corner of a door that's attached to the wall. And as it swings and pivots, you'll create a really large opening. And if you have multiples in a row, as they pivot open, you create a very large pass-through. And then multiples that are sort of segmented by the doors, like you see on the left. In the image on the right, as you can see, it has this very grand, kind of massive appeal. And if it's swung, at a 90-degree angle, you could actually walk through, most likely on the left, it's narrow on the right, but you would be able to go through that way. And then we have Dutch doors. So Dutch doors kind of fall into that like charming category, I think. And you'll see them, on cottages and older houses a lot. It's really where the door is divided in half. So the bottom half and the top half can be locked together, or they can open independently. So, very often you'll see these in maybe rear entrances, laundry rooms, things like that. Spaces, sometimes people have them so they can, put a dog or something like that in that room. So you can keep the bottom closed, perhaps, like I said, keep a dog contained or something like that in the back. But then open it so you can actually see through. It's almost, kind of like going up to a bank teller or something. These can be solid. They can have glass, but it's really about that division and having the two parts be independent. Now we have French doors. So French doors are comprised of a significant amount of glass. The whole idea of the French door is they open, they meet in the middle, they swing open at those hinge points and create a very large singular opening, and they have a lot of glass, very frequently divided with, a lot of mullions, as we see in these examples. You have individual lights of glass, although you can have very contemporary, sort of smooth openings as well without a lot of mullions. We also have louver doors. Louver doors are frequently used on closets as well, and they are often used on folding doors. And they really offer a visual privacy, so you can close off a space, but they do allow airflow, and they're usually lightweight, and they have kind of a certain look to them. So, again, closets or dividing, maybe a living room from a dining room space could happen as well. Sometimes you will see these also used in restrooms and things like that, where you want a certain level of privacy, but maybe not heavy solid doors, like especially on like bathroom stalls and things like that. You can see louver doors. Then we have the whole idea of a raised panel door. So there's many different styles that this could be in. With the raised panel, whether it's one panel or multiple, as you can see over on the left, you're getting that raised piece of molding going around the edge. It's actually lifted from the surface, so it's raised. We can also have flat panel doors. So flat panel doors are just that. They don't have that raised molding element. And so if you were to run your hand across it, it wouldn't sort of bump up. So these actually still, on this slide, have a certain amount of decoration to them. So we still have those flat panels sort of in the center, but we don't have that raised molding. So they're flat panel doors, but these have some divisions to them. But we can also have very flat, very flat panel doors. And we really refer to these as either flush or slab. And that's just when it's basically just one flat, even surface. Very contemporary, very, very modern.